Hi, this is Carrie Sparks with Moving with the Market and Empire Title today here with Brian Reeve from Neighborhood Loans. We're going to talk today about rates and what's going on in the market. Brian and I have worked together for a number of years. I'm super grateful for that. And really, he's one of the top people in the whole entire industry that I've ever met that has the knowledge and the drive that he has. And so we'd like to know, Brian, what do you think? Will rates go up or will they go down? And kind of how does that fit into the summer of 2025?
Money question, right? Like everybody's asking this question. So there's a lot of variables that go into interest rates. There's a lot of moving parts. There's labor reports. There's CPI. There's the Fed rates. There's a lot that goes into the overall rate and determining what that needs to be. To simplify it for most people so they understand, like a lot of times we hear out on the news that, oh, the Fed's dropping the rates. And so if the Fed drops the rates, then we're going to see interest rates drop.
That's really what we're seeing on the news too, is the public is really looking in what is the Fed doing, but in reality, it can be something very different inside of the mortgage industry.
So what you're going to hear is from industry professionals. You're going to hear repeatedly from industry professionals that the Fed rate has nothing to do with mortgage interest rates. And that's not entirely 100% true. It does have a little bit of an impact, but not the impact that you would assume. So a lot of times when the Fed comes out and drops the interest rates a quarter, everybody just assumes that mortgage interest rates are going to drop a quarter. Now, to give you kind of a fluid understanding of a little bit of how mortgage interest rates, without just vomiting at the mouth for hours on end, is that we typically compete for the same customers as the 10-year Treasury. So the 10-year Treasury yield, what that pays when people are investing in the federal government, is typically in a normal market, we're about 175 to 200 basis points, typically on top of the 10-year Treasury. What happened in June of 21, when the Fed started raising the rates, the Fed rate does affect immediately, to some extent, the 10-year Treasury. So what happens is the 10-year Treasury starts to raise, then our yields that we offer investors, because we compete for the same customers, our interest rates also start to raise. And that's what kind of drives this, right? So during June of 21, you had a lot of Fed rate increases to taper off inflation and bring inflation down. You're at a 9% inflation rate. Target has been 2 since the last administration. We've got close there. We've touched it. We've come back up. So the question is, right now, we've seen a couple of cuts through the years, through the last 6 months to a year or so, even 2 years, we've seen a little bit of cuts. And so that has affected interest rates, and mortgage interest rates drop because the 10-year has fallen. The problem that we see with rates is with margin compression and service release premiums. What was happening is that the 10-year, even though it was fluctuating, our spread on top of the 10-year got almost up to 350 basis points instead of 175 to 200 basis points. The reason being is because a lot of the servicers that had servicing values in these loans realized that we have to keep these loans on our books for a certain period of time before they really net any profit. The servicing value of the loan, almost essentially the same as like a property manager for a property. Are they going to rent it out for 3 months for you, or are they going to have a 2-year lease that they're going to do this before they make their profit? And so what happened is the servicers started front loading the SRPs, which caused interest rates, when the Fed started raising the rates, to be overinflated in interest rates. The interest rates were almost 1% higher than what they technically should have been, because the servicers wanted to be able to get paid back the money and the yield. Now, what's happening is, as interest rates are coming down, we're starting to see these servicers actually start to wash their portfolios. They're calling customers, they're refinancing them as the interest rates go down. And as they're doing that, these loans are starting to gain a little bit of added service value. And as they're adding a little bit of service value, you're starting to see that 350 margin start to reduce. And so like right now, we're about 260 basis points on top of the 10-year. So we're not quite there yet, but it's getting lower. So as we see more of this data come out, and we're starting to see these servicing portfolios get washed, and we're starting to see margin compression start to regain a little bit, you're going to see interest rates start to ease.
What do you say to those people who go, well, now you've talked about the 10-year. Is that something that we should be paying attention to, or should we be hiring somebody or having a relationship with somebody who's watching those rates, staying in touch with us? What would you suggest? I mean, because the average person, should they be out looking at the 10-year and trying to gauge all these things? Because what you went into is very complex. And so what would you suggest about just
So
the average person looking at the market?
So I think watching the 10-year and the effects that the Fed rate cut has on the 10-year is definitely something to pay attention to. One of the things that we look at right now is what we call the dots plot. So the dots plot is basically all the members of the Fed that make up the Fed. It's basically essentially as if you went and said to a jury, like, hey, are they guilty or not guilty before the verdict is read, right? We already have an idea of where all the Fed members are at right now. And so right now we're seeing almost all Fed members right now electing for the rates to be below 4. It's just that Jerome is holding tight right now. And so we expect to see that probably crack a little bit depending on what the consumer price index looks like and what the overall inflationary measure looks like along with jobs reports.
So we potentially could have a really good market at some point, sometime in 2025, maybe 2026, for the opportunity for homeowners to refinance and bring some of that interest rate down and maybe help their budgets a little bit?
I think the market is entering into a healthy environment right now. And so one of the things that we have to contend to when you're buying a house is there's a couple of things that we have to look at. We have to look at the overall expenditures and how much it costs, what overall inflation numbers are, where is your money going out of your household. When you look at inflation and CPI, 44% of inflation is shelter. So when you have a piece of pizza of the pie and you're looking at all of the things, insurances, you're looking at gas, you're looking at all of these other things, 44% of that is rent or housing, right? And so it's kind of weird because as interest rates start to reduce a little bit, it will affect overall inflation because such a large number of that is shelter. And so when we come off years like COVID, which sometimes we reference in the industry as the fake years, is the government infused a bunch of liquidity into the market with buying mortgage bonds. And what that did is that caused a lot of interest rates to drop to 2.5. And the problem is when they drop to 2.5, 3%, that creates demand. And when that creates demand, it sucks up our inventory. And as it sucks up our inventory, we get a lot of people that are moving out of rental pools into buyer pools. And then what happens, the demand, it's simple economics, supply and demand, right? When the demand goes up, the house price goes up dramatically. And so if you remember in COVID, during open houses, we had lines of cars up and down the street, 100 over asking, right? And that is indicative of the interest rate environment, right? In migration. So when you have a market where the interest rates did the opposite, we got up to 8 1/8, 8 1/4 in interest rates. Now we're sitting back down around 6.875. When you have that big swing, it cuts off. And then what happens is the housing market starts to soften a little bit. And as the housing market starts to soften, some of these houses are underwater a little bit. And so it takes a while for that to all iron out. It takes a while, and it's been going on since 21, and now we're kind of at a healthy approach now to the market where I think we're seeing it, right? And so you're going to see reports out there where housing market is softening and different things. But if it takes the Fed a little bit to drop interest rates a little bit, that'll create a little bit more demand. And as it creates a little bit more demand, that'll offset some of the softening.
Are you anticipating some of that happening like this summer? Do you see like a rate drop at any point in the near future that will really get some homeowners excited or potential homeowners excited about, jumping back into the market?
So we're talking about a couple of different things.
You did mention in previous conversations with me, interest rates go down, demand goes up, and the percentages sometimes that are involved in those changes and how it can really affect the buying power of somebody who was on the fence and all of a sudden maybe can't purchase because they waited too long?
So the overall, most investors, there's many types of buyers. You have your buyers that are first-time home buyers that are there's a time and a season for every buying process, right? And with first-time home buyers are going to be more rate sensitive. They're going to be payment sensitive. They're coming out of a rental. They don't like the shock of the house payment being so much higher than their rental price. But the thing that renters don't consider, or typically renters don't consider, is return on investment, right?
Right.
And so
That's almost its own segment, talking about rent versus own again.
exactly. If you're looking in a stable market and you're looking at a 5% increase, right? Or you're looking at a 6 or 7% increase, for every 1% that the interest rates drop, the house hyperinflates by 5%.
There you have it.
So if you have a 10% increase on a $500,000 house, a renter may say, hey, I'm not going to spend an extra $400 a month over my current rent. However, $4,800 for the year, if your total amount is 10%, where are you going to invest $4,800 and get $50,000? It doesn't happen. But renters don't always necessarily see that. And so you have to have these return on investment discussions with renters in those types of situations. You also have, right now we're entering into an area where we're going to have probably start more luxury buyers because of the same concept. Is they're buying, markets softening into some respect. We're expecting possibly some rate cuts from the Fed. We're going to see some demand. We're going to see some migration. And so their overall return on investment is going to be higher than it would in just a normal stable market. When a buyer buys, the other thing that we have to look at too is a buyer sentiment. And is this a time for a buyer to buy? What is in the average consumer's mind right now? In versus what interest rates are. Interest rates do drive into a lot of that, but there is some things that we do know. A couple of things is we have a lot of world stuff going on right now.
Right.
We have stuff with Iran, we have stuff with Israel, you have Gaza, you have Pakistan, you have India, you have Ukraine, you have Russia. And so most buyers, when they're sitting back and they're looking at, hey, is it a time to buy? A lot of times people, what we do know through historical trends is that buyers don't buy during wars. Now, it's not necessarily wars overseas that are not affecting us, but it's wars in the sense of, is there a chance or anything that could potentially affect our soil, right?
Right.
And so then people start thinking about, all right, we need to hunker down. We need to get a year's supply of food. We need to get 72-hour kits. We need to basically put more money in cash. We need to take more cash out of the bank. We need to store more at home. We need to do all of these things because we got to protect and prepare for us and our family. And sometimes when those types of things happen, people aren't always out buying houses, right? And so we have a report that we watch sometimes to figure out buyer sentiment. It's called the M1 report. It's from the Federal Reserve. It basically gauges liquidity in the market. So it knows payroll. It knows exactly earnings that individuals are getting. And it also knows that where that money's being reinvested. Is consumers buying stuff? Are they investing into the stock market? So it kind of trends that in-between point that it's technically in the borrower or the customer's account, checking or savings, right?
So we're looking at a very interesting summer where I almost need to get my magic 8-ball out and ask it questions to go, what do you think's really going to happen? But I sense that you have a sense of optimism.
I do.
And
I do.
I think that's really important, that the mindset and looking at a home purchase or looking at your home as a financial investment. I mean, I don't feel that overly attached emotionally to my properties. I look at it as I'm investing for my future and really look at what is in the best sense of my budget, how does this work for my family, and really taking a good look at the overall financial picture of each individual to make sure that it's put together in a package with forethought of, like, what are we going to do? How long are we going to be in it? You know, what do I want to achieve by this purchase? Is it just shelter, as you mentioned, or is it, do I want to have this as an investment? Where is it located? Back in the day, we used to talk about location, location, location. Not so much, especially during COVID. It was, can I get this under contract? So there's lots of shifts that have happened in the last few years in our marketplace. and it's going to be an interesting summer. See what happens. And I appreciate the opportunity to work with you, work with your staff, and have access to the knowledge and the passion that you have for this industry, and look forward to doing more podcasts with you over the course of the summer and maybe past that, and see where we go with being able to really bring good quality education to the community, and of course be able to ask you questions. But I'm Carrie Sparks with Empire Title, your Arizona title gal, and Moving with the Market host here with Brian Reeb. Do you want to give your information on how to get a hold of you?
Brian Reeb, branch manager with Neighborhood Loans. You can reach me at 602-741-4801.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today, and then stay tuned for more episodes of our podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.